Good evening everyone, Yom Tov. It's Real Crime Stories time for you, and this week it's been asked of me if I would please tell you about Gein. So we're around the kitchen table and we're all milling around, and I pop up and say, hey guys, I've heard about a guy called Gein. I'll tell you what I found out about him. And you go, yeah, okay. So that's what we're going to do. Well, this is what I found out. Edward Theodore Gein, born in 1906 in Wisconsin, in the United States of America. His father was called George. He was an alcoholic. His mother was called Augusta, and she was extremely religious. She was Lutheran. She had, like I say, two sons. Ed was the younger one. The elder one was called Henry George. And every afternoon she would read Old Testament Bible parables, or not parables, fire and brimstone stories to the boys, to literally put the fear of God into them. She told them that all women, except herself of course, were prostitutes and filled with evil, and to stay away from them, and that alcohol obviously was evil. So here's to you, Mrs. Gein. And smoking was bad. That's a real shame. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. Ed, when he went to school, he wasn't very popular. Apparently he was quite effeminate. And he would sit and tell jokes and then laugh at them. Literally laugh at his own jokes and sit and giggle inanely. And the other children would, make fun of him. The only thing he was good at school was reading. But he absolutely adored his mother. She was his whole world. And as they were growing up, his brother Henry had sort of grown away from their mother, and he thought that she was evil, and he tried telling Ed this, and Ed wouldn't listen to him. Well, in, I believe it was 1938, he and his brother were out working, I believe it was in a field. I'm sorry, there's a lot to him, and I've got to keep trying to remember the sort of things that he did. It was, his father died in 1940, and his brothers were working, they were working on a field, and there was a brush fire. This was 1944. And they were working on that, and then it was reported that Ed's brother had gone missing, and that he'd obviously died in the fire. His body was burned, but when his body was examined, they found bruising to his head in several places, which said to them that he'd obviously had blows to the head before, dying in the fire. But they couldn't prove anything. But it was added to the list of people that Ed Gein murdered when he came to have to take accountability for everything he'd done. Well, in 1945, Ed Gein's mother died, and he was absolutely grief-stricken. He said that he'd lost the love of his life, and he inherited the farm where they lived, and he boarded up every single room that his mother had occupied, and he had it that way as a kind of shrine to her. And he only kept a couple of rooms free for him to use. Well, nobody was really sure about what he was up to. People knew of him, but he'd sort of escaped attention. And in 1957, the owner of the general store is a lady called Bernice Warden. She went missing. And the last person to have seen her was Ed, because he'd been in the previous night and said that he was going to get some antifreeze and that he would be back for more in the morning. So, with that being said, the police went to Ed Gein's house, and not only did they find Bernice there, they were literally welcomed into a house of horrors. I mean, this guy was known as the grandfather of Ghoul. He was the Plainfield Ghoul. I mean, he was just absolutely terrible. And they broke into the house, and they found that he'd been reading Nazi war magazines. He was very interested in the Nazis and some of the experiments that they'd done. But it was the sort of things that they found that absolutely horrified them. And he admitted straight away that he had murdered Bernice Warden. He decapitated her. Her head was in a sack. 3 years earlier, in 1954, a lady called Mary Hogan, who owned the local tavern, she'd also gone missing. They found her head as well. So he'd murdered her. So there were 2 people that he'd murdered. Plus, when you add his brother to it, there's 3. Now, apparently, there were they reckon there was approximately enough body parts found in that house for 9 people. So, and the reason why that they worked that out was because Ed admitted to grave robbing, and he was making things out of body parts. I'm not going to go into everything. If you want to find out the sort of things he made, then you could look up Murderpedia. You could look there. But he made chair seats out of human skin. He had skulls on his bedposts. He had eating bowls made out of human skulls. He had a pair of lips attached to a drawstring for the blinds on his window. He had a there was a box. Oh, sorry, I've got a bit of a pain. Sorry. Just got a bit of a pain in my back there. Right, sorry, I was just stretching my back and it was a little bit painful. There was a box with 4 noses in it. You know, things like that, but I'm not going to go into the rest because I think you would find it far too much. Well, anyway, he was also not very good at cleaning up after himself, and the couple of rooms that he lived in were, you know, it was worse than hoarders. It was just horrible. He said he couldn't stand trial for the reasons of insanity. So they actually examined him. They said he had schizophrenia, and they committed him to the mental asylum. They tried to enter him for a retrial or a trial, I think in 1964, and thought that he was probably playing up his insanity, but the reason by then that he definitely was insane. So he went back to the mental asylum and he died there in 1984 of pneumonia, I believe. I mean, I've honestly got to tell you that, I mean, what was it they said? That he inspired Psycho, he inspired Silence of the Lambs. I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a film that he inspired. I don't know of any others, but I mean, I don't suppose that you want to imagine looking at a chair where the seat is made of human skin, where the legs are made from femurs. He'd also, here's the thing, and this is where you can understand where Psycho definitely comes in, if you've ever seen Psycho. He was actually making a suit, a woman's body suit made of skin. He'd made a torso, he'd made a corset, he made leggings that he could put on, face masks, that sort of thing, and I mean, made from a face. And this was because he wanted to bring back his mother. He wanted to get inside female skin so he could be like his mother. And I think you've got to admit that at that stage, I mean, I don't know whether the guy had an Oedipus complex or, I mean, I don't know. He may have had genuine incestuous feelings towards his mother. And it wasn't as if she was particularly kind to him, because she wasn't. But it seemed that the worse that she treated him, the more he adored her. He had no time for his father. But that was what his end game was. I mean, apparently Bernice Warden, and Mary Hogan sort of were like similar to his mother in sort of height and weight and general outlook, you know, sort of the way they would dress and things like that, which I suppose was typical of the women in the 30s and 40s, especially if you're poor. But his end game was he wanted to be his mother. But in order to achieve that, he murdered, I think he was only charged with the murder of Bernice Wharton. I don't know about Mary Hagan or Hogan. He definitely wasn't charged with the murder of his brother, but it was added to the list because it was, I think they took it as read that he had murdered his brother. And I reckon he'd murdered his brother because his brother was bad-mouthing their mother, and Ed snapped and killed him. And as they were working with a brush fire at the time, it would have been easy to drag his brother's body into where the flames were and then just say he must have fallen into the fire. But unfortunately, that's not how it turned out. So I don't know what you think of him. I'm sure, definitely in America, you'll know him much better than a lot of us over here would know about him. I'm sure if he'd been sane, he would have been on death row. I don't know if that might be a discussion that we should have one day about where you stand on the death penalty. Should we have one or should we not? But that's all I've really got for you on Ed Gein. There are a lot more artifacts that he made, but I'm not comfortable talking about them. And that's purely because I'm trying to be very sensitive to everybody's needs. So I'm keeping it to the bare minimum. And if you want to look into them more, then please feel free to do so. But I have to be very sensitive to the needs of everyone. And not everybody will have a strong stomach. Not everybody would be able to handle this. And I must admit, when I first looked at this, I just thought, I can't believe I'm going to be telling this story. But it's like everything else. Everything happens for a reason, and the story needed to be told. And now I'm glad I've done it. And I hope I never have to revisit it, because there are certain murderers that I find it very, very difficult to talk about. I'm not saying he was the worst. He definitely wasn't the worst, but he's definitely stomach churning. So I'm very glad that we've had our little chat about him. So on that happy note, my friends, if you have any requests for future crime stories, please let me know. And as you always know, I will read them for you, research them for you. So just leave your ideas for me down in the comments. And please let me know what you thought. And if you did like the video, would you please take the like button on holiday with you, if you ever go away on holiday, and buy an ice cream. Thank you very much. Anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And just take care of yourselves. I love you all. And I'll see you all again very, very soon. Take care. Bye for now. Bye.